The hum of the engines filled the narrow cabin of Flight 907, a steady mechanical song that always lulled passengers into a half-dream state. Overhead bins clicked shut, safety announcements rolled out in polished monotone, and flight attendants moved down the aisle with rehearsed precision. It was supposed to be an ordinary journey along, quiet hull over the ocean, but sometimes destiny waits in the most ordinary places. In row 17, a man sat quietly by the window, gazing out at the runway lights flickering against the dusk sky. His black suit, though not brand new, was neat. His dark hair fell just slightly past his shoulders, a little untamed. His eyes carried a calm, steady focus, as though the world outside the window planes taxiing, workers guiding with glowing batons, vehicles scurrying across the tarmac, was far more than background noise. He was used to being overlooked. That was fine with him. But then came the voice, loud, sharp, carved with arrogance. "Hey, poor! That's my seat. Move." Heads turned. The cabin, which had been filled with the dull buzz of boarding chatter, seemed to freeze for a moment. A tall man in his 60s stood in the aisle, dressed in a flawless tailored suit that practically screamed money and authority. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his cufflinks caught the light, and his shoes looked as though they had never touched dirt. He was pointing, not just gesturing, but stabbing the air with his finger at the quiet man in the window seat. The accusation carried more venom than necessary. He could have said, "Excuse me, I think you're in my seat," or even, "I believe there's been a mistake." Instead, he chose the word that burned poor. The quiet man looked up, startled, blinking as if pulled from deep thought. For a second, he seemed confused. Then he simply said, "I'm sorry?" The businessman sneered, "Don't play dumb. 17A is mine. Move it, now." Murmurs began around them. A mother with her child 2 rows back shook her head. A college student across the aisle smirked at the audacity. A flight attendant, still several rows away, noticed the rising tension but hadn't reached them yet. The quiet man reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his boarding pass. His voice was low, almost apologetic, as though he didn't want to make a scene. "It says 17A," he said, holding the ticket up for the man to see. The businessman snatched the ticket, his eyes narrowing. Then his lips curled into a cruel smile. "Well, then the airline made a mistake. This seat isn't meant for people like you." The word "you" dripped like poison. The quiet man didn't reply. He just stared at the older man for a moment, long enough that the arrogance faltered ever so slightly under the weight of his calm gaze. Then he folded the boarding pass neatly and tucked it back into his pocket. The cabin waited. The businessman shoved his carry-on into the overhead bin with a loud thud, muttering about idiots and cheap flights, then stood in the aisle as though waiting for the flight attendant to come validate his superiority. Meanwhile, the quiet man remained seated, hands folded in his lap. His posture was not one of defiance, nor submission. It was something else. Stillness. The kind of stillness that makes people uneasy because it hides everything. Passengers whispered. Why'd he call him poor? Maybe he recognized him? That guy looks familiar somehow. The college student across the aisle leaned toward his neighbor. Man, if that were me, I'd have already told the old guy off. Did you see the way he looked down on him? Like he owns the plane. The mother hushed her child, who asked loudly, "Why is that man yelling?" Even the businessman noticed the shift. His anger was turning into something else, the awareness that an entire cabin was now watching him. For men like him, powerful in boardrooms, used to obedience, public judgment cut deeper than silence. "Stewardess!" He barked, snapping his fingers as though summoning a servant. "Get over here and fix this." The young flight attendant hurried forward, her professional smile wavering under the weight of the scene. She glanced at both boarding passes, checked her list, and frowned. "Sir," she said carefully, "it appears both of you were assigned the same seat. It's a double booking error. Please, allow me just a moment." "There is no error," the businessman cut her off. "I paid for this seat. This is mine. He can go sit in economy where he belongs." The word economy echoed with disdain. The attendant swallowed, her eyes flicking nervously to the quiet man, who gave her a small nod as though to say, "It's fine." "Don't worry." But it wasn't fine. Not really. Something about this was more than a seating dispute. Something about the quiet man radiated the sense that he could have stood, could have spoken, could have ended the confrontation with a few words, yet he chose stillness. And that stillness unnerved people more than shouting ever could. The businessman eventually huffed and moved to the aisle seat, grumbling about lawsuits and incompetence. He sat beside the quiet man, still fuming, tapping on his phone with unnecessary force. But the cabin wasn't finished whispering. Eyes still darted toward row 17. Something about the man by the window made people curious. The mother leaned toward the college student. "Doesn't he look familiar to you?" The student squinted. "Yeah, I swear I've seen him before." "Maybe on the news? Or, no, wait, I can't place it." The truth was that no one could quite identify him because he didn't want to be identified. He had spent years perfecting invisibility, not literal, but social, the art of blending in. To the world, he was just another face in the crowd. But under the surface, his story was anything but ordinary. This was a man who had once lived under a different name. A man who had walked away from power, wealth, and fame, deliberately disappearing into anonymity. He had traded it all for peace. Or so he thought. Because fate has a way of cornering you, no matter how far you run. And on this flight, high above the clouds, fate had just found him again. An hour into the journey, the plane hit turbulence. Not unusual, at first, just the normal rocking that sent drinks trembling in their cups and made passengers grip their armrests. But then it grew stronger. The seatbelt sign dinged, the captain's voice crackled with instructions, and flight attendants strapped in. The businessman cursed under his breath, fumbling for his seatbelt. He muttered something about incompetent pilots, about how he should have flown private, about how cheap airlines hire cheap staff. The quiet man by the window remained motionless, his eyes on the storm clouds forming outside. The shaking worsened. Overhead bins rattled, a baby cried, the lights flickered. Then came the sound no passenger ever wants to hear, a deep, guttural thud from the engines. The cabin gasped. The plane dipped suddenly, violently, sending a wave of panic through the rows. People screamed, clutched at each other, prayed under their breath. The businessman's arrogance shattered in an instant. His face turned pale, his hands trembled. He looked around, desperate for someone to blame, someone to save him. And then he looked at the quiet man. The man by the window slowly turned, meeting his eyes with the same calm expression he had worn since the beginning. But now in that calm, there was something else, a certainty, a strength, a silent assurance that reached past the storm. Passengers noticed it too. In the midst of chaos, his stillness became an anchor, a beacon. And in that moment, a question silently spread through the cabin.